Thank you very much. My name is Riemer. I'm the Chair of Business Information Systems at the University of Sydney Business School. This does fit on a business card, I can assure you, but it's very small font. So thank you very much for being here. I'm also leading a research group on digital disruption, which we founded about 3 to 4 years ago. Sort of knowing that we were up to something. And we founded a conference called Disrupt Sydney, which we ran 2 times until now, 3rd time this September. It was kind of new 2 years ago. Now everyone does disruption conferences, which is good because I think it's an important phenomenon and a phenomenon that is not terribly well understood. So as an academic, I'm pretty much doing what everyone is doing, trying to get to grips with what is happening out there. It's just that I'm paid for it and I spend a lot more time than anyone else on it. That's really all that there is to it, and a bit of training in methodology, but it's really a privileged position to be able to sort of try to get your head around what is happening out in the world. I should say that we have a pretty good view up from the ivory tower, so that makes it a bit easier, I guess. No, seriously, we're working a lot with companies, going in and out and try to talk to people and see how they experience the digital disruption phenomenon. And we have learned a thing or two in the past few years, and this is my opportunity to share some of those insights with you. Now, digital disruption is a real phenomenon. There's something going on there which shows up in the data. So if you look at these figures, they're quite scary, really. There's a lot of companies, large companies, that close up shop, and the average tenure in the S&P 500 companies over the past few years is decreasing dramatically, which means we see a lot more turnover in terms of new companies entering markets and incumbent businesses dropping out. Now, as an economist, which I'm not, but as an economist, you might take this top-level view and say, you know, that looks like a healthy turnover. It's just an ecosystem. There's fresh blood coming in. That's fine, right? But if you are in one of those companies that are being phased out, the reality is not all that great. So the point being that it sort of pays off to try to get your head around what is going on and learn a little bit about what you can do facing this phenomenon. It's a tricky phenomenon though, because digital disruption, or the disruption phenomenon in particular, is one that is hard to spot, but when you realize it's coming, it's a bit like a tsunami. So it's not that people in companies like Kodak were sitting around twisting their thumbs or being, totally oblivious to what is going on. There's a number of things that make it very hard for incumbent businesses to react to the impending disruption, and so that's one thing I want to talk about today. So, first of all, the key question would be, what makes digital so disruptive? You always know that something is important when we turn an adjective into a noun, right? Digital is no longer an adjective, it's now a noun. We do digital. We do social, right? It's a thing now, and so that makes it, almost inevitable. So the first thing I want to say is digital disruption, disruptive change is what we call path-breaking change, and I will tell you, or I will illustrate for you what we mean by that. Path-breaking change is change that you cannot extrapolate from the past into the future. Now, let's take a look at an example. This is a quote from 2007. The topic was convergence of technologies, yeah? And so that was largely taken for granted as a sort of, the orthodox opinion at the time was that integration of functionality into devices is really not what anyone wants. You get a substandard experience, so consumers will naturally prefer devices that are built for purpose, like a digital camera or an iPod, right? And then that happened, okay? Now, when the iPhone was introduced, and you can go back in time and read up on the internet what the commentary was like, that the iPhone was largely dismissed, okay? The commentary initially was pretty negative, and the device as such was in some respect pretty bad. It was a pretty bad phone, let's face it. It was hardly able to make a phone call. Now, the point being that dismissing the iPhone at the time made sense because from the standpoint of Nokia, this was just a bad phone. They didn't have the phone technology right, and they didn't in the first instance. From the point of view of BlackBerry, this device was really bad at doing messaging and calendaring because you didn't have a physical keyboard, right? Who wants to type on a touch screen? Seriously, who wants to do that? So that was the common wisdom at the time. That was established fact about the industry. Any extrapolation on what counted as a fact in this industry, right? If you had all the data about the industry and did the most advanced big data analytics, you wouldn't have predicted what happened next, right? This is the Pope inauguration in 2005, I think. This is 2013, right? Now, the disruption that we've seen goes through all aspects of our private lives and professional lives. These devices have fundamentally changed the way we communicate, relate to each other, consume content, information, do meetings, organize our daily lives, shop. I could go on and on. So this is a fundamental disruption that if anyone had come up and told you in 2007 that this was going to happen, you wouldn't have believed them. Yes? We take it for granted now. We look back and it seems inevitable. And we say, of course, the iPhone is a great idea, it changed the world. And it did, but people didn't see it as a great idea at the time. And this is a phenomenon that happens over and over again because guess what? No one needed an iPhone at the time. No one needed a car, right? We heard earlier from John about, what consumers want is a faster horse. They didn't need a car. They didn't need a computer when it came out, and they didn't need an iPhone when it came to market. Yet, these things enter our lives, and they become truly disruptive precisely because they become normal to us. And when those disruptions, those innovations become normal to consumers, what happens is they change what counts as the product, they change what counts as the market. And it happens over and over again. And we do it over and over again. Now we have a new product. We don't know if this is going to be a success, but we can predict quite well that it is initially dismissed. And we over and over asking the wrong questions. So we ask questions like, what problem does this solve? Well, it doesn't solve a problem. The iPhone didn't exactly solve a problem at the time. The point is that disruptive technologies do not solve problems. They enable us to do new things. They change the world. So they are precisely disruptive because they allow us to do things that we cannot imagine. So this is not a failure of analysis to come to this conclusion. This is a failure of imagination. Now, disruptors, and Apple is one that is operating on a large scale. It happens at a small scale. The point is that a disruptor does not set out to play your game. The disruptor sets out to change the rules. Yeah? Disruptors will always try to do something different, not better. They will always try to create something that makes the customer want their product. And once they achieve this switch in perception and understanding, your product will then look outdated, old. And I will sort of talk about this with another couple of examples, how this happens. Now, first of all, let's ask another question. What do these disruptors do? So we've picked out a little segment of the market, which we call disruptive intermediaries, and we took a closer look. So we did some research together with Capgemini. This is a collaboration which we call the Australian Digital Transformation Lab. So we do these studies into the Australian landscape on a regular basis. We have done a couple of reports on the Australian retail industry, and this one here takes a slightly different angle, and we looked at digital disruptive intermediaries. So what we did is we went out into the market and basically analyzed anything that we would remotely class as disruptive. So we analyzed those intermediaries and looked at what are they doing? What are the functions, the functionality that they provide to the market? In what ways do they change the way in which markets operate and are structured? So we came up with 8 what we call archetypes of digital disruptive intermediaries. And I'll walk you through these quite quickly because you know most of the brands, but I will tell you what are they doing and what is the sort of core functionality that makes them disruptive. So let's start with what we call digital stores because they have been around for a while. Amazon, Expedia, they still disrupt. I mean, we've taken a closer look at the Australian retail industry, and digital is still disrupting the retail sector because for a variety of reasons, we see the industry here play catch up and go through certain phases of development that Europe, for example, has seen 5 to 10 years ago or even earlier. So digital stores, they basically make it convenient to shop. You know what they do. They put in one place all the different offerings in a product category. They basically solve the customer's search problem. Now, these ones, they're getting a bit more interesting. Netflix as a content hub fundamentally changes the way in which we can access visual media, video, TV shows, movies. So they disrupt the industry by, first of all, digitizing the product and providing a one-stop shop where the customer can access these contents on demand. Sharing hubs, YouTube, initially dismissed as sort of, this place where all the junk videos live, is now slowly becoming a really disruptive force precisely because it grabs a lot of consumer attention. It gets a lot of eyeball time. So YouTube, and we might not be into cat videos, right? I'm not personally. I like cats, but I don't get this whole thing online. And I don't have a cat video, I apologize. So those sharing hubs are really disruptive to the media industry, to traditional TV channels, precisely because they grab younger audiences, essentially those that are quite interesting to the advertising industry. Now, in markets that are quite fragmented and where price intransparency rules, but that are otherwise commodity markets, and which means competition happens on the basis of price, this class of intermediaries, promoters, change the way demand and supply are allocated. So they play the intermediary role. They basically rank offerings by price. They then channel the customer to whoever is the cheapest or most preferred supplier, and then grab a share of the transaction afterwards. So once those disruptive forces take hold in an industry, what happens is that retailers are no longer in charge of the customer contact per se, at least for a certain type of consumer, and they tend to find themselves to be competing on the basis of price only, which is never a good situation to be in. Aggregators like iSelect, they operate in markets that are very intransparent. Take insurance, take utility. Sometimes markets where the suppliers themselves have made it deliberately hard for consumers to compare their offerings. And this is where they come in, harvest the information, crunch the numbers, present them in a customer-friendly way, and then are able to solve the customer problem that the suppliers have deliberately made hard to solve. All right? Okay. Crowdsources, you all know Kickstarter probably. There's other crowdsources, the design crowd and other crowdsources in many different areas. They do what we call intent casting. They allow the customer to specify their problem and then allow suppliers to offer solutions. Solutions can be in the form of funding, but can also be in the form of a project brief, of a design that then is being picked by the customer, and whoever provides the appropriate design then wins the contract and the transaction. So they do something that didn't exist before, much like the sharing hubs. So some of these some of these digital intermediaries do something entirely new, which is then sometimes disruptive to industries that are only ancillary to where they initially started, like YouTube now starts to disrupt the whole television field, when in fact they were largely dismissed as this toy online, right? So sometimes those disruptions pretty much come from left field. Discriminators like TripAdvisor, they operate in markets where quality is hard to judge, like in the hotel industry, hospitality, tourism, but even insurance potentially, where the consumer doesn't really know what the quality is like before they participate in the service consumption. And so through collecting and then somehow aggregating and presenting consumer reviews, developing scores, they are able to change the way in which the industry operates. Some say they empower the consumer. They are certainly disruptive to established ways of assuring quality, like the star system in the hotel industry. And they are also disruptive to the players in the market themselves, because they are able to, lay bare and uncover quality problems. So by and large, as a system, they should be a good thing. The problem with things like TripAdvisor is that they operate with a very intransparent mechanism. So we don't actually know how the scoring is done. We don't know to what extent it can be manipulated. So while those disruptors do certain things quite well, there's always question marks involved. And then finally, what we call the matchers. This is your Uber, Airbnb. They follow a very simple brief. They reallocate demand and supply. They match the consumer with their offerings, be it hospitality, as a place to stay, or a mode of transport, as in Uber. They basically disintermediate the established forms of buyer-supplier allocation, which means they move in a very privileged position. Now, we've also looked at which market conditions lend themselves to disruption. So I go through these quite quickly because I've already talked about them. First of all, any market that is hard to comprehend from the customer point of view. Fragmented markets lend themselves to digital intermediation, because it allows the intermediary to make sense of the fragmentation, present it to the customer in a digestible form, and then own the customer contact. The second one is lack of transparency. Utility, insurance, telecom are traditionally those industries which are very hard for a customer to comprehend, because they have many different options. There's a lot of fine print involved, and this is where disruptors can really own the customer contact, because they are essentially solving the problem. Inefficient monopolies. I mean, this is your classical case of disruption. The taxi industry, a monopoly which is pretty much guaranteed, which has for a long time lived on very high margins and markups for credit card transactions and all the rest of it, are always prone to disruption if the disruptor finds a way into the market and a way to reinterpret the customer problem, let's say. Variations in service quality, that's your tourism, that's your services that the customer doesn't know what they pay for before they actually partake in the service delivery. And then lack of market access, again, that's Uber, that's Airbnb, that's the kind of cases which allow or which prevent small operators competing with large conglomerates sometimes. So digital disruptors can really break open those markets and allow smaller operators entry into those markets. Now, this is only the tip of the iceberg, and there's more to it, and I could go on with these sort of structurations, but I want to actually do something else. I want to ask the question, why is it that incumbents are so slow to react? Okay, so that's the key question. Why do we have a hard time dealing with digital disruption when quite often it unfolds right in front of us? Now, there's a couple of phenomena that we need to recognize. The first one is visibility. They are essentially hard to spot when they unfold because in hindsight, things look inevitable. But at the time, there's all sorts of different technological options, different small players in markets that compete for attention, that compete for the customers. And so when you're in the midst of it, it's not very clear where the disruption is going to happen and how is it going to unfold. In particular, because the disruption is not just a new technology, it's not just a new player coming into the market. As I hinted at earlier, the disruption is something much more fundamental. It is actually something in our collective understanding, in how we perceive the market per se. So a digital disruption not only changes the service offering, it changes what the market is about. Take music. Take music, take MP3, when they were first, when they came into the market early on with Napster and the like, they were largely dismissed because MP3 has inferior quality to CDs, right? The sound quality wasn't as good. Guess what? It still is. It's still not as good as a CD, but it doesn't matter anymore because what music is about has changed. Music is no longer about quality, it's about accessibility, mobility, instant gratification. It permeates every aspect of our lives and we expect it to be with us. So what has actually happened is that our understanding of what music is has changed. And on that new understanding, a CD is a much inferior product. So it's not that MP3 has gotten incrementally better, it's just that the quality aspect, which was important initially, is no longer important. The new normal in this industry is all about access and mobility. It's no longer about quality. Quality is now very much a niche aspect of that industry. There's still audiophiles who cherish their vinyl and their record players, and that will always be there. But where the music is in this industry is in accessibility, instant gratification, and not just accessibility to your own music, to all music. So what is happening here is that disruption, the technological progression, happens slowly, but that shift in understanding quite often feels quite sudden. And when that shift in understanding happens, the previous incumbent on that new understanding looks almost inevitably inferior because they're no longer competing on the old rules of the market. Kodak had that problem. Quality of pictures, the ability to print a picture in good quality is no longer something that consumers need and want. It's still an aspect that exists, but it's no longer what photographs are about. It's about instant sharing, for example, and the ability to have vast collections of pictures and to edit pictures, to do something with pictures, to be creative with pictures. And Kodak, with their incumbent technology, couldn't play that game. Now, information rules. And the new rules of disruption in digital disruption are that disruptors compete on the basis of digital, on the basis of information. Quite often they don't own the assets. Uber doesn't own modes of transport, Airbnb doesn't own any hospitality, any place to stay. What they do is they reorganize the industry by way of being in control of the information flow. They own the customer contact. They can own the data, which is a very powerful currency, as we all know, and they can work with that data to, iterate on the customer experience, whereas the previous monopoly, the previous incumbents struggle to keep up with this game because they have to maintain physical assets. They're not as good at this game, so they're falling behind and they have to play catch up. Now, this is a very important one. And I want to spend a couple more minutes on this. A lot of our companies, especially large companies, are built around compliance, around efficiency. Efficiency-oriented business process management bureaucracies, they all work great in growing markets, in mature markets, when the business is well understood, because they allow us to achieve economies of scale, they allow us to be really good at things, and they allow us to manage large companies. But they're terrible at innovation, and they're terrible at being responsive to external change. Yeah? And the main reason is that our management tools themselves, what we teach in MBA classes, I must say, is actually what is the problem here. So Carl Weick, who's a pretty famous organizational theorist, management scholar, he has this notion of drop your tools, which is very hard to do. When you're a manager and it is your job to allocate budgets, business cases is what you do. Cost-benefit analysis is what you do. But you cannot do cost-benefit analysis of something that is potentially disruptive, because you might know the cost, but you have no way of knowing the benefits. So how are you supposed to do a cost-benefit analysis? How are you supposed to imagine new futures with models that are inherently geared towards extrapolating the future from the past? It just doesn't work. So we really need different approaches to management and to running our organizations. So all those systems that are built to reduce risk in mature markets become the greatest liability for many large organizations, unfortunately. And then finally, and again, and I stress this again because it's so important, the disruptive service is not better, it is different. But we fail to see it. My case in point, the NBN. Fiber to the premise NBN has been largely dismissed and ruled out now, because on a cost-benefit analysis it looked inferior, because guess what? It has higher cost and we don't know the benefits. Sure, we don't know the benefits, but there's no point of knowing the benefits. There was no point of knowing the benefits of the iPhone in 2007, as I think I have demonstrated, and so we don't know what to do with this. Fiber to the premise NBN is not about download speed, it's about upload speed. It has the same upload speed as download speed. Every consumer would have upload speed to become a TV studio. No one needs that, but that's my point. What we would do collectively as businesses, as small businesses, as consumers, if we all had the upload speed of a TV studio, I have no idea, but I'm quite confident we would do something world-changing. Unfortunately, it is not going to happen, because we have made the decision on something that looks entirely reasonable and sensible. We have done the right thing. We have done a cost-benefit analysis, which is what we do. Unfortunately, it is not the right tool for this job. And so, finally, as disruptors are being disrupted, they tend to be quite late, because it's hard to spot the disruption, and then because of the typical management approaches, they're also quite slow to react, and therein lies the dilemma. And any good model needs a good acronym, and so here's your acronym, virus, and I've sort of chosen this deliberately because it is in the nature of the virus that it spreads slowly, but when the first symptoms show, disease is already underway. Thank you.